It is September 12th, 2021. There's a lot I want to talk about. As I'm working, I have this constant stream of thoughts going through my head in great detail about what I would like to express. And then, sometimes I question myself, or I will set it aside and come back to it later to make sure that it is what needs or would benefit from being said. And one of the things that's been up for me a lot lately is psychic phenomenon and spirituality. There's a real sort of burgeoning or growing community of people who are interested in and expressing, psychic abilities on social media, including YouTube. And I got interested in that for a couple reasons. One is, as I said in my introduction, I published a New Age magazine back in the mid-1980s for several years in Atlantic Canada, covering three provinces, or four provinces. And at that time, part of our community that was supportive of this publication was all about spirituality. And by the way, that was inspired by the Harmonic Convergence, which was a fairly significant event at that time. I think it was 25 years before 2012. And so the intent of that publication was to bring together people from across the region to connect them in reality. This is way before the internet as we know it. And that succeeded very well. It was not an insignificant publication. It was 64 pages, full-size magazine. So it required a tremendous amount of work to put that together quarterly, 4 times a year. And it was run by myself and my partner at the time. And of course, within that community, a subset of that community was the psychic community. And so we became friends with quite a few psychics, and they would often hang out with us, or we would visit them and socialize with them and so forth. So I was exposed to a lot of those kinds of people back in the day. And a lot of them were really lovely people. One in particular who was a truly lovely person. So this phenomenon is not necessarily new to me. That we're talking 35 years ago? Am I right? Yeah, 35 years ago or so. And myself, of course, I have had personally very powerful sort of what could be described as psychic experiences going back to my childhood. Many of them to my early childhood, and even through my teens and all along throughout my life. It's interesting. So that's one thing. One is, there's a connection between the New Age movement that occurred back then, which was kind of a big thing for a while, and then this new phase of awakening that's going on now, which seems to be happening on a larger scale, but it has a lot of similarities to what occurred back in the 1980s. And started then. And that, of course, is all. What happened then was also linked to what happened in the 1960s with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo, where there was this whole countercultural movement that arose amongst young people who really questioned the status quo. And I actually became friends with and hung out with a lot of those people locally in this part of the world, who were very involved in that. I was a bit younger than them, but they became my friends, and one of them in particular became my mentor for many years. He was actually a very accomplished academic, had multiple degrees, had been on the dean's list, and studied philosophy and a wide range of subjects. Very academically inclined, but also very sort of open and spiritual at the same time. So he introduced me to astrology back, this would have been probably, 83 or something. Yeah, probably. I spent 2 years when I was in my early early 20s, like just right around 21 or 22, or I lived in the woods off grid with no electricity or running water in a little cabin, so more like a shack. But it was beautiful, and that was a really fantastic experience. It was on a co-op, which was communally owned land, where they had 125 acres and of pristine forest, and that was an amazing experience for me to have. So anyway, back to the thing about the psychic stuff. So yeah, because of my association with the New Age movement back in the 1980s, and sort of again witnessing this, what seems to be an awakening that's occurring on a larger scale on the planet. We now have social media and we have the internet, and so we're all kind of instantaneously connected, and we have all these platforms for communicating and publishing and broadcasting, as I'm doing right now. So I'm fascinated by it for historical reasons. I've always kind of keep tabs on what's going on, and I also have kind of a bit of an innate ability, as has been demonstrated throughout my life, to be a little bit ahead of the curve. So what I'm often interested in becomes mainstream 5, 6, or 7 years later than when I actually pick up and pay attention to it. I was early adopter of desktop publishing, early adopter of computers, very early on the internet. I was on the internet when it was just bulletin boards, but pre-internet, when you had to dial in through a modem and connect to a dedicated service and all that stuff. And, Bitcoins, all kinds of things that I have picked up on very early on. I mean, I took an interest in Bitcoins when they were below $50 each, for example. So I see this phenomenon now, and I think it's really cool. It's also, the other component to it was with the former president, 45, I saw as a very clear and present danger to planetary security and the biosphere, because I felt that if that administration was reelected, it would have been catastrophic for humanity, for all kinds of obvious reasons that I'm not going to go into here right now. That's a separate kind of conversation. And so, in sort of out of desperation and concern, somehow managed to find my way to a lot of the psychics and readers who were discussing this. And like many others, I was looking for a light at the end of the tunnel, or some hope about what the heck was going on. Like, why was this happening? Who would have thought that we would be on the brink of outright fascism in the United States, which is the most powerful economic and military country on the planet? And that's what it was, a very, very, very serious threat. And many of my friends and colleagues who are similarly inclined were extremely concerned about this situation. I sort of saw it as kind of the dark side getting increasingly desperate, because more and more light was flowing down to the planet and illuminating the planet and lifting up the planet, and the dark side was basically freaking out, going like, holy crap. So it got increasingly extreme. And if we look at what's going on right now, this polarization that we're seeing politically and socially, I think that's self-evident. The dark side is terrified, because if there is enough light and illumination here on this planet, then it can't do what it does anymore. There will be no place for it on Earth, and it will be, in effect, sort of banished in many ways. And that's what we want. Anything that isn't done with love, compassion, and empathy is just not right. And so, that's not fascism. Fascism is the opposite of that. Or a theocracy, or whatever, or the combination of the two. And so anyway, back again to the thing about the psychic phenomenon. One of the things I wanted to share about this is that, first of all, I have met many, many, many psychics over the years, and I've met psychics who are so incredibly gifted that they literally knew what you were thinking and would speak to what you were thinking without you even opening your mouth about it. And I've had that experience multiple times. And sometimes these people are so wide open psychically that they literally have to kind of detach from society quite a bit, because if you think about it a little bit, if you were that psychic, it would be very hard to function in the world, because you know everything that somebody is thinking, all the time. Would kind of drive you crazy. Which, so they're a lot of them kind of would sort of isolate themselves socially, and they're out there, and some of them you'll never hear of. You don't even know. And I, just for various reasons, was able to cross paths with such types of people. But what I wanted to say more importantly is that, and this is not to be, I'm not intending this to be harmful or critical towards anybody, but that just this statement I want to make is that just because you have psychic abilities does not mean you're enlightened. I've met many psychic people with powerful psychic gifts who are not particularly evolved from my perspective, and having discussed it with others, I was not alone in my assessment. And that's not to be disparaging towards anyone, because we're all at somewhere on the continuum, but the two aren't necessarily inextricably linked. Now, often as someone does spiritual practice, whether it's meditation or whatever your spiritual practice is, you will increase your sensitivity, and you open up your chakras more, and your gifts, those kinds of gifts, will emerge naturally, because we actually have all of those abilities naturally. All of us have those abilities naturally. It's just that often they are shut down in childhood because our culture and our society doesn't value them, or even disdains them, or is frightened by them, or doesn't understand them. Now that's I've also met people. Boy, do I bring up another contentious issue? Maybe. I'm probably going to be saying a bunch of stuff that may piss people off, but I don't really care. I don't have a problem with being critical, and I'm going to address that as well. Often, where I was going is that if people, the more spiritual practice that you do, the more evolved you are. Yes, you do tend to have more and more psychic and intuitive abilities, because, like I said, they are actually, in fact, natural. And what you're doing is you're tapping into extrasensory perceptions or other dimensions of yourself, because we are multidimensional. We are not just the physical, which is really the root of spirituality, is the knowledge and discovery and exploration of that. So yes, there are some people who are very evolved who have psychic abilities. I'm just saying that each person has to be sort of looked at individually. Now, why does this matter? It matters to me because back in the New Age movement of the 1980s, and by the way, there was another spiritualism movement in the late 1800s that people may be interested in, and that was this Theosophical Society was a large figure in that movement. So these movements do come and go. Alice Bailey and the Blue Books and all that stuff came out of that period of time. And it was often a blending of Eastern and Western sort of philosophies and traditions, as spiritually or religiously, even in some cases. But back to my point about the New Age movement, was that what happened over time with the New Age movement is that it kind of it fell into glamour. The reason I brought up the Theosophical Societies, because as to my knowledge, they started to widely use this term glamour, and what glamour meant or represented was falling into the illusion or the maya of reality. So that there's a concept of spiritual materialism where the ego is being satisfied through its association with sort of glamorous kind of phenomenon, or stuff that's like, whoa, and what happens is that, and in the case of the New Age movement, it kind of got trivialized, And a lot, then there's all of the sort of bottom feeders that come in and try and they see a trend and they want to capitalize on it financially or materially. So, they start to produce all kinds of junk and products and everything. And then over time, what happens is that it becomes discredited because it becomes very materialistic and status. You get these figures that arise, and they're not necessarily people who are really, best representative of these movements, and it falls into disarray and loses its essence. So the concept of glamour, which I'm not actually describing very well because it's actually quite a complex subject, but it is sort of materialism applied to spirituality, to the point where the materialism becomes the spirituality, to the adherent or to the person involved. And what I'm trying to get at is that what happens is that this is a way of kind of discrediting an entire movement. And that's what happened to the New Age movement. It became so materialistic. It became about products, and it became about, trivial things and material things and goods and services, and people trying to make money from it in all the different kinds of ways, and hangers on, and others who would try and ingratiate themselves with prominent figures in the movement and so forth. And it just became the kind of thing that ultimately nobody with a lot of integrity wanted to be associated with. Now, and honor, right? Or dignity, people with honor and dignity and integrity. So they then distance themselves from it, and poof, there goes an entire movement. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's actually how the dark side tries to undermine these movements, is through things like materialism and glamour. So I'm not pinning that on the psychic community per se, but I am starting to see patterns that resemble what occurred after the New Age movement that emerged in the 1980s. And this brings me to the role of critical thinking. And so, like, for example, not too long ago, somebody published something, and there was an error in a critical error in this presentation, and it wasn't malicious or deliberate. It was just, we all screw up. I mean, I screw up all the time. And then I noticed one of the listeners commented that, "Oh, I don't want to be negative, but," okay. And then they pointed out the error, which was in fact an error. And this is not a matter of opinion. It was literally, factual error. And I'm like, so, we have to be careful of not being discriminating in a variety of ways, and we have to not, because there's also this kind of strain of anti-intellectualism that sort of seems to pervade the spiritual movement, because you've got a lot of empaths who function on very much on a feeling level, and you also have people who are, and then on the other end, you'd have sort of more the people who approach it more intellectually, where in fact it probably should be a balance between the two, because God gave us brains, and we should use them. And so one of the other points of contention or concern that I have is how people sort of often will drop their guard intellectually about things because they don't want to rock the boat or be perceived as being negative. Well, what that does over time is it literally undermines the credibility of the entire movement, because you then there's the risk of becoming associated with the lower elements of the movement, or those that are just hangers-on or opportunists trying to cash in and make money from it. And then the whole thing just loses all, like, nobody will want to be associated with it because it's just garbage and bullshit. And I'm aware that of time here, because I don't want this to be too long. It may already be, because these are big subjects, that you could talk about each one of these sort of main points I'm bringing up. You could do like an hour on each one easily. But I wanted to point out that basically in a lot of spiritual traditions, and traditions go way back, right? Like Eastern spirituality, has been around for centuries and millennia, right? This is, this quest for enlightenment is not new, right? Go do your reading. Go read Autobiography of a Yogi. Just probably should be. It's something I would recommend everybody read. Or Siddhartha by Herman Hesse. Oh boy. Or The Convoluted Universe, Book 1 by Dolores Cannon, which I have recommended to many people over the past couple of years. I'm not so much interested in all the earth mysteries and stuff like that, because to me there just seems to be some sort of glamour around that. Like, I'm interested in sort of the hardcore spiritual components of things. I'm not doing this for entertainment, Where was I going with all that? Probably at the end. But just that, standards. I'm not saying that we attack other people when they say things that don't make sense or that don't sit right with us, or that are even objectifiably wrong. But I am saying that we need to maintain some critical thinking abilities and apply them, so that people just don't slip into a lot of bullshit all the time. I have actually heard many things from prominent figures in this sort of burgeoning community of people that were just flat out wrong, and in some cases actually really bad, like quite alarming. And nobody calls them out on it. Because they don't want to be perceived as being negative or be ostracized or whatever. Now, again, it's not about attacking somebody, because we all make mistakes, and God knows I probably have made about 100 already, and just this would be my third sort of broadcast. And I will almost certainly make some more in the future. I mean, everything I'm saying could be wrong, and I'm open to that. Like, if somebody can show to me that I'm just off base, I welcome the criticism, assuming I will concede that it's accurate and warranted, and I will retract statements if I make them and they turn out to be completely factually erroneous. I don't care, because I'm not egoically really attached to beliefs as someone, like in the way that somebody who might be religious would be, right? Where, like, if you attack their religion, they perceive you as attacking them. I don't really care. So I'm just arguing for quality and consistency and integrity, most of all, right? What else did I want to say about this psychic stuff? I think I said everything I need to say. Like I said, I feel like I could talk about this stuff for a very long time. There's just so much to say about it. But I do realize or recognize that most people just can't sit there and listen to something for hours. I do. I listen to, for example, there's a podcast called the Astrology Podcast, and I don't always agree with their approach, but I will listen to it, and they've done episodes that are 3 hours long. That doesn't bug me. I listen to stuff while I'm working. I very rarely actually watch anything on YouTube, by the way. I almost always just listen to it, because I can listen and do other things. It's very rare that I could sit in front of my computer or my phone or whatever for an hour and stare at the screen. Like, I mean, come on. So that's kind of one of the reasons I'm producing this more as a podcast, is for that reason. As I said, I took an interest in the psychic community because they were kind of talking about what was going on politically in the United States and offering insights and reassurances about that. And most of the ones that I was listening to at the time were right. So I was kind of glued to that for a long time, because, like I said, I recognized that if that administration got reelected, it was kind of game over for the climate, and probably game over for the planet, and probably civilization. Big deal. Biden is now the president. There's still all kinds of crazy stuff going on in the U.S. Their Pluto return is going to be exact. I believe it's this winter coming. So it's just nuts. However, what I've been finding lately is I'm less and less interested in the characters and figures on the Republican side, who a lot of the readers are reading on. because I really don't want to be associated with that energy. And I kind of feel like even though the crazy hasn't stopped, the Biden administration is doing a pretty good job under the circumstances of having a handle on things. And so I'm sort of starting to turn away from that. There's also in the psychic community, I find there's an increasing amount of what I would consider, idle sort of chit chat or, talking about celebrities or whatever. I have no interest in that personally. There's some that are sort of tuning in and trying to bring in channel messages from higher dimensions. That's interesting. There's some that are asking questions of from the higher dimensions, from spirit, that concern people. I find that still quite interesting. But just generally, I'm noticing that, like, I notice that when I listen to the discussions about figures, challenging figures on the Republican side of the equation, that it actually brings my energy down. And I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm kind of sad because that provided me with a lot of entertainment in the past, like countless hours. And I probably listen to all the people that you, or many of you, may also listen to. So, I think that one of the other main points about all the psychic stuff, I think that the reason it's important to talk about it is because as more and more people awaken, they're going to be starting to experiencing those, the veils are thinning, very much so. This is, a lot of people have been saying this, but I've also experienced this myself and seen this myself. And a lot of these people are going, when they start experiencing these, what to them will be strange phenomenon, are going to be looking for guidance and reassurance that they're not going crazy, and some understanding about what the hell all this means. What does this mean, right? I'll do another discussion on paradigm shifts, because that might be helpful to people. But I'm expressing all that because one, I see the purpose of it. I understand why a lot of these people have been coming forward and putting themselves out there, and that, yes, that serves a purpose, because it could be quite shocking to somebody who comes from a very traditional worldview or paradigm to suddenly start having psychic experiences. that could make people go crazy, but how they apply their knowledge and their experience, I think really the realm is the primary realm. I mean, if you're not just trying to get eyeballs and high view counts and whatnot, is more on the helping people understand what those phenomenon are, how to manage them, how to work with them, how to refine them, how to do spiritual protection, energetic protection, and so forth. Those are the kinds of things that would be constructive. I guess if I'm a barometer of the public, like I said, I'm becoming increasingly less interested in the crazy people on the Republican side of the equation, and what they're doing, because they really represent a lot of the darker aspects of humanity. And like I said, I find that when I'm tuning into that energy, it literally lowers my own energetic state. So, I'm looking and interested in content that is not just uplifting, but informative. If any of that makes any sense or is applicable, I'm just sharing that with you because, like I said, I tend to be a barometer of the, if not what's happening now, of what's coming. It was brought to my attention that there was something I had omitted that I intended to include here today. And that is, there's a phenomenon kind of going on right now, which, I've spent a lot of time listening to, which is remote viewing. And I want to express that personally, I have some qualms about that, some concerns. Like, for example, in all of this studying and practice that I've done, it was always emphasized emphatically that, permission was required in order to do any kind of energetic work on somebody else. Now, I also happen to have an 8th house Sun and Mercury. So, in my own case, privacy and not being interfered with energetically is something of concern to me. that I take very seriously. So any kind of energetic work I have had done on me or I have done with others has always been done with consent, explicit consent. Now, I think if I understand it correctly, and I haven't studied this in detail, if I understand it correctly, the people doing remote viewing would argue that, hold the position that they are gaining permission on a higher level. However, I ask you, the listener, to ask yourself if you would want to be remote viewed by somebody else who didn't necessarily understand your circumstances, your life story, or might lack the context that would inform about who you are and why you are the way you are and so forth. Because often, people are quick to judge other people based on superficial impressions or limited impressions or erroneous assumptions and so forth. So there's always the concern that a casual observer may not actually reflect the full reality of a person or situation. I don't necessarily have qualms about doing remote viewing about situations, and perhaps less so with public figures, because they have opted to put themselves in this position where they would obviously be under a great deal of scrutiny, and there would be, well, not complete scrutiny, because of course there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that we know nothing about. I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I'm not saying yay or nay entirely to it, but I will, to be completely honest, I will say that I do have reservations about the concept. Now, in my own case, I have stated to my guides and to the universe that I do not want to be remote viewed, and not to conflate the two, but I also do not want to be energetically interfered with or manipulated by external forces without my explicit consent. So if that holds true and it applies, and let's say somebody wanted to, interfere with me energetically somehow, or remote view me, and I'm not saying those are the same things, remote viewing and interference are not the same thing, but then theoretically there would be karmic consequences for doing so. And so that's a concern as well, right? So I think that this is something that should be really considered and perhaps discussed. I see that, we all want to know what's going on behind the curtains of, various political organizations and administrations and so forth. And to some extent, I would say that we actually do deserve to know these things. But there are rules in third dimensional reality governed primarily by Saturn, and Saturn also rules karma. So it's just something that has always kind of a little bit bugged me in the back of my mind. And I'm not expressing this to be critical or negative of anybody. A lot of these people I very much respect, and I sense that they have that their intentions are good. But I do think that every being, I'm getting chills, and I wish there was a better word for that. I'm getting somewhat chills here saying this. I do think that every being deserves a certain degree of respect and privacy. There's a lot of figures here on the planet that are doing some stuff that we, do I dare tread where angels would fear to, that are doing, I'm going to save that for another day. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I'm not condemning anyone. I just wonder, I suspect that there are others out there where this doesn't quite sit very perfectly with them either, right? So I'm putting myself out there just to express my qualms or reservations. My higher self might be like, oh yeah, I don't care. This is just another incarnation of me. But this part of me does. I don't, there's a lot of things that have happened in my life between me and other people that are nobody else's business. So I'm tacking this on to the end of this broadcast, which is getting really long. So hopefully somebody will listen to it. All right. Bye.